What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Den of Geek Presents Marvel Standom Live, where each week we give you the deepest possible dives on all the goings on in the MCU, Marvel Comics, and beyond. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Cicchini, and this week we'll be talking about sense and nonsense, like Moon Knight Episode 5. I will do my very best to only say nice, relatively non-confrontational things about this episode, just like the true hero of this series, Dr. Arthur Harrow, did this week. Anyway, with me for all time and always, we have Den of Geek TV editor Alec and Den of Geek News and Features editor Kirsten Howard. And once again, we have returning special guest, pop culture writer and Den of Geek contributor Joe George. How's everybody doing?
Great.
How does Joe graduate from special guest?
You got to do like 10 in a row, I think. So, like,
we have an elaborate.
As long as I'm still special, I'm okay with that.
We have an elaborate hazing ritual.
So let's get right into it. Kirsty, why don't you tell us what happened this week?
I will try. In the 5th episode of Moon Knight, Stephen and Mark have to balance the scales of justice in the realm of the Duat as they make their way to the afterlife. If the scales don't balance, the duo will be lost to the Duat. If they do, they will spend eternity in paradise. Sounds pretty good. But as Stephen and Mark explore Mark's repressed memories in the psychiatric hospital, Mark realizes he must truly connect with Stephen to understand how he ended up there. Unfortunately, balancing the scales also appears to mean losing Stephen to the Duat. Meanwhile, Mark talks to Harrow in another version of the hospital as the good doctor tries to find a way to get him back on track.
This was a pretty packed episode, and while I'm not quite ready to offer my apologies to Joe for my criticisms of last week's episode, I do think this is the best episode of the series. So where did everybody else fall with this one? Joe, why don't you start us off as our resident Moon Knight defender?
Yeah, good episode. Not going to blow anybody's mind by saying that. Missing Layla, but outside of that, it was. I appreciate the deep dive into Mark and Stephen's psyche. Didn't necessarily need everything explained, but I was glad that we got those. A lot of opportunity for Oscar Isaac to do some different types of acting, and of course he killed it just like you would expect. The only real criticism, let me say this, I like how it's still kind of laying in the ambiguous territory, and it's making me hope that it's not going to immediately explain everything that's going on, that we're going to kind of stay questioning for the last episode. But outside of Taweret, I'm going to pronounce that name wrong every time, I loved all the rest of this episode. All of it really worked for me.
How is it pronounced? Has anyone been paying attention?
It feels like there's like 6 syllables in the way that they're pronouncing it, and I can't get my head around that. So, sorry, dumb Midwestern accent. I can't pull it off.
I've been saying Taweret, which I'm pretty sure is vastly wrong.
Duat, the Egyptian underworld. This is Taweret, goddess of women and children.
Alec, you were my fellow hater last week and in previous weeks. Did episode 5 make a little sense of the nonsense for you?
Well, yeah, we've been partners in hate for a long time now. But so, I mean, you guys are right. Like, episode 5 is probably the best episode. The issue for me, though, is that I feel like the previous 4 kind of lost me so thoroughly that episode 5 doesn't have that big of an impact one way or another. I mean, we've seen 2/3 of the series up until this point, and the 2/3 kind of turned me off the whole project enough that there wasn't much that episode 5 could do to reel me back in. But at the very least, it was a more interesting watch than what I'm used to with this show. The Egyptian elements here, I feel like, finally come across as like really cool, as opposed to kind of shoehorned in. Another thing that I really like this time around is whatever technical aspects or tricks they're using to get 2 Oscar Isaacs on screen at once is completely seamless. I think it's a credit to kind of the production staff there and just Oscar Isaac's performance that those Steven and Mark are incredibly distinct. And it's not even until after the episode that I even realized, like, oh wait, that was like one guy just talking to himself the whole time. But yeah, I mean, like other things, it's nice to have some pieces of Mark's origin story in place. You know, he has mommy issues, issues of violence, probably low self-esteem. It's just that, like, you know, we've seen that before. We've seen a lot of things on Moon Knight before. I'm glad it's here. I'm glad they did it. It was probably the best episode overall, but I would describe it as too little, too late to avoid my wrath.
Yeah, I kind of got that sense myself, where I'm like, this is really good, and it looks great. Like, it looks really, really good. It's probably the best looking episode of the series as well. But in a lot of other ways, I find myself being like this is the best hospital food I've ever had, or whatever. You know what I mean? Where it's like I can only kind of judge this on the basis of the rest of the series, and you know, and once again, it is frustrating because we get these tantalizing glimpses of just like the greatness that I think is, you know, that could have been there, you know, and there were a lot more of them this episode. I thought the stuff that dealt very directly with the comic book origin of Mark Spector into Moon Knight was really great, you know, and it's like they could have hit this stuff harder, and I think it would have been really effective. Kirsty, however, wrote a glowing review of this episode, which you absolutely should go and read on denofgeek.com/Marvel right now. Kirsty, why don't you take us through some of your thoughts on the episode? Because I think you were higher on this than just about anybody else, and you are the Moon Knight expert.
I feel like we have seen the unravel the mystery through a journey through the protagonist's trauma trope many, many times. I feel like it works here. And, you know, that it could have not worked here, but it did. We also got some background on Mark being Jewish. I've seen some reactions on Twitter that it didn't do that very well. I'm not an expert on it, so I can't speak to that myself. But so we have all these elements now of Moon Knight that are from the comics, and they are juggling them on screen. And I was saying earlier to someone else that Moon Knight is kind of like that game you play where you fold a piece of paper up, like many, many times. And one person draws, yes, exactly, Alec, exactly like that. One person draws a head, another draws a body, another draws the legs, and another person draws the feet. And then you open up the piece of paper and see what kind of weird creature you've created. Every writer's take on Moon Knight has brought such a unique thing about him to the canon that what we're dealing with now is like, you know, he's the avatar of Khonshu, he's a mercenary killer, he has DID, he's Jewish, etc. There's all these things about him that make him stand out. I don't envy these people trying to make all that work on screen. The fact that this show makes it work as well as it does, even though it's a hot mess, like arguably, I think is an achievement. And this episode proved that it could make all those elements gel together, especially a lot better than it has in the previous 4 episodes. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's tough for me to argue with that. I mean, look, clearly, you know, throughout this, I think some of our more vocal criticisms, especially me and Alec, we've been in the minority here. You know, obviously, Joe and Kirsty like the show a lot more, and our audience, like the overall Marvel Standom and Den of Geek audience, is way higher on this show than I've been. And you know what, folks? Like what you like. What can I say? I just still continue to see missed opportunity after missed opportunity here, and like, you know, some bizarre choices being made. But, you know, that being said, there is still, you know, enough to, you know, I felt myself drawn back in, whereas last week I was ready to give up. You know, and some of the kind of tantalizing elements that I think we're missing is the way they are teasing the Jake Lockley altar continues to fascinate me. And I'm pretty sure we actually saw Jake at least once, if not twice, this episode. My theory here is the first time we are dealing with Mark and Dr. Harrow, and Mark has like a broken nose, like a boxer, and he's all beat up. And, right before he's about to attack Harrow in particular, his demeanor changes and Oscar takes on like an almost kind of De Niro-esque, like he kind of makes like a De Niro / Sean Penn scowl, the type, right? Like, I don't know that was Mark, because later in the episode, when we return to that scene, because remember, Mark then gets a needle in the neck for his troubles there. When we return to that later, his face is clear, and he's like, "Did you drug me?" And it's right, and that's before Steven takes over. So that tells me that I don't think that was Mark at the start of the episode. I think that was Jake. And my other suspicion is that I think that was Jake getting drunk in front of Mark's mother's Shiva. And, you see there's a yellow cab in the background of that scene. So like it's never explicit that it's Mark there before Steven takes over. So I don't know. It's interesting. It's curious, but how do you resolve this with only one episode to go?
I wondered the same thing, especially the shot outside of the Shiva and the least populated street in Chicago, apparently. But especially since the two of them look at that and say, I don't remember that. And I do have that same question. I don't necessarily need an explanation for the purpose of each of the identities, but now that we've got one for Steven's purpose, it is a big question for who Jake is and what is it. Why did Mark create him? Especially if he is the more violent fighter. Why did he create that identity, and how was that going to jive with Mark the mercenary? If he had to offload if he had to secure all of his innocence in the form of Steven, it doesn't make sense that he would also need to offload all of his awfulness onto Jake if Mark himself was fairly awful. And it's not, again, I don't necessarily need them to answer that question, but because they sort of raised the issue in this episode, now I'm wondering it. I wasn't wondering it with the first 4 episodes, but now I am. And I'm trying not to judge the entire show for how it can stick a landing that we haven't seen yet. But boy, that is a nagging question, isn't it?
I think we might want to allow for the possibility that there is no Jake. Because I know that the show appears to be speaking on a comic reader wavelength that I just can't, I'm incapable of picking up on. Because for the second time in as many weeks, you guys are talking about this Jake, and I'm like, who is this guy? I'm not picking things up with Mark's destroyed face. It just made sense to me that Mark got into a scuffle with some of the orderlies. I'll defer to you guys on that one. I won't be shocked if there's a Jake. I will say also that I think something we talked about last week appears to have been shot down, in which we thought that maybe it was Jake that killed Layla's father. But based on that memory, which could be biased because it is coming from Mark, and we have 1 episode to go, he makes mention of his CO Bushman bringing him out there and going nuts and killing everybody. And the evidence we have on hand seems to support that theory. So I am not 100% on all this Jake stuff, but then again, I think it just seems like a lot of stuff in the show is going over my head anyway. So I'm not the best source to trust.
I did like that theory a lot last week, and I genuinely did think that was where they were going. And instead, we got a pretty traditional interpretation of, the actual origin story, which is fine, which is totally fine. I'm not, but that is a change that would have been pretty drastic, and it's a change I would have been cool with had they decided to do it. Yeah,
Bushman is a tough character, not exactly the most sensitive portrayal. So I understand why they've cut a lot of him out. They are missing. Sorry to go straight to the comics again, Alec, but they are missing. He has giant jaws from James Bond type teeth, and that's in the comic. How he kills Mark is by biting. I think, is he shoot him or bite him? Now I'm missing. He at least bites one person with his giant steel teeth, and that's totally missing. We could have used that, but overall, I don't see how you pull off Bushman unless you do like a full-on Shang-Chi type Mandarin, where you get just an amazing actor who's able to bring that humanity and life to a racist stereotype, which is kind of what he is in the comic. But still, we're missing a little bit of coolness and the over-the-topness, but maybe it's better that we don't have it.
Yeah, I mean, Bushman's a very problematic villain and always has been. So if this show just dismisses it with, oh, well, my partner Bushman did that, then that's fine. We don't need to see any more, do we? We've got it.
I don't know how much we should really deal with the childhood elements of it, because, I mean, frankly, I don't know how interesting that is. Like, I really don't. But I think in terms of, sorry, Alec, how this deviates from the comics, it is pretty significant, and now we're getting into areas of the comics that even I'm not familiar with. All I knew, as somebody who's read my fair share of Moon Knight comics, but not an exorbitant amount, Mark's father was a rabbi, and his alienation from his family came from a conflict with his father, who expected him to, who expected Mark to follow him into the study of the Torah. And, they've gone a completely different route here, and made this about a lost brother and, issues with his mother. Kirsty or Joe, is any of that at all? Like, did Mark even have a brother in the comics, or is this just like a complete...
Oh, yes. But if you bring Mark's brother up with Moon Knight comics fans, you'll get your ass kicked, probably. He's not a popular character. No.
Oh, go on.
No, I'd rather not. I
just said I'm going to get my ass kicked.
I just told you, man. No, so yeah, Mark's trauma in the comics mainly comes from his dad's friend, who turns out to be like an escaped... Joe, you can correct me if I get any of this wrong, but like an escaped Nazi who is also a serial killer, and Mark finds out that he... Yes, that he has been involved in all this really horrific stuff, and it kind of traumatizes him at a younger age. And did I get that right, Joe? I honestly can't remember much of this. This is the Bemis run, right? Or Bemis? We can't pronounce anything around here. Nothing.
I think so. That doesn't. I didn't get a chance to rewatch or to reread anything before between watching the show and getting this, so that all jives with my memory. Yeah.
Let us know in the comments if you're a comic reader and you've glossed over some stuff there.
Yeah, but I'll take the hit for talking about Randall. Randall Spector is almost like the everything that Kirsty just said about the kind of misshapen version of Moon Knight's canon and lore, because he shows up once as Hatchet Man, but then it turns out that's he's Hatchet Man. He's like this. It's basically a straight-on slasher version of a Moon Knight story that happens in the Hulk magazine when they were trying to do kind of more horror style thing to spin off the TV show. And then they do this weird thing where they're like, well, no, that's not actually Randall. It's somebody else who got plastic surgery to look like Randall, who got mangled because of a grenade that Mark threw. And then Randall keeps coming back as variations of Moon Knight, he's called Shadow Knight, I think, most recently, but he has another one where he's like Moon Shadow or Night Shadow or something like that. He's just, it's how Moon Knight comics go. They just kind of make it up, and one writer jumps up and they're like, hey, we're going to bring Randall in. He's going to be this totally different character. And we just kind of go with it because that's what it means to read Moon Knight comics.
That's right.
So, aren't you missing out, Alec? Don't you want to jump in on this?
I don't know about all this Moon Knight nonsense. I gotta say, I honestly feel like the gulf between my expectations for what something was going to be and then what I eventually got may have never been more vast than in Moon Knight. Because like I read some comics, but like more importantly than that, like I like to think I keep up to date with stuff. Like I can't help it because I'm surrounded by these nerds. Like so like I like to feel like I have like a rough understanding of what's going on in the comic world and like who characters are. And like all I heard about this Moon Knight fella was that he was so cool. He was like lightly fourth wall breaking at times, funny, an investigator like Batman. And there's like all I'm getting through this show and what your guys' description of the comics, just this weird sullen freak that is not appealing to me at all. Like, I don't know about this whole enterprise. Maybe Moon Knight was just never going to hit with me.
I mean, it does make me wonder here. What is this show ultimately about? Because to me, and this has been my problem from episode 1, Moon Knight, in as much as he's even in this show, like Mark Spector is a character that things happen to. Like the alleged protagonist of this show still has not actually driven the narrative forward at any point, as far as I can tell. The only actual character with agency is the one that we didn't even see this episode with Layla. So like I'm still struggling to figure out like what is this show about. Joe, can you encapsulate this here? Because if I try and do it, I'm gonna fail. And Alec is already out. Like Alec's checking out. So.
Well, I can tell you what it's about for me, or at least I can tell you how it resonates with me. That it's about a guy who finds out that he's actually a much worse person than he thought he was. For me, Stephen is still the protagonist of the story, and you're right. He's something that he's somebody to whom everything is happening. But that works for me because these things are happening to him, but he's also finding out that he's done things, these terrible things. The moment where in this episode where he stops and he says, I thought I was the main one, but you created me. On the surface, that's kind of a goofy line, and I think Isaac sells it well. And what really hits with me at that moment is that, again, that sort of, I thought I was one person, Stephen thinks that he is a gentle, harmless nerd who is going about his life as a relatively good person. And he kind of has all of these layers ripped off for him, where he finds out it's less compelling, the whole, Luke Skywalker, Harry Potter, chosen one. This isn't what it is. He doesn't find out that he's actually super special and is actually the most important, coolest person in the world. He finds out he's a horrible person, in fact, and he has all of this awfulness beside inside of him or next to him. And for me, the compelling element that's still driving and keeping me interested, besides I'm clearly an easy mark for this nonsense, is this idea that that Stephen is finding out that those are him. He keeps saying, it is me, this was my body, I have this too, variations of that, which means not only can he do cool stuff like Mark did, but that he's done the things that Mark has done. And again, we keep running around to Jake, but I hope if it turns out that Jake is even this more awful version, I think that's only going to accentuate that. So that's what's getting me into it right now. I still think that's the theme through the first 5 episodes, but again, that's just for me. So be curious to hear what you guys say.
I don't know whether we'll know what this show is about until next week. That's my feeling about it. It's still sort of teasing other things going on, ulterior motives and different realities, and which one is real and which one means something to us. So I don't think we're going to find out. If I think about it as in terms of the structure of a Marvel series, I did notice with this one that it's a penultimate episode, and it is very similar to the penultimate episode of WandaVision, in that, that is when Agatha took Wanda through her past memories to unravel the mysteries of the show. And in the next episode, basically what we got was, after that great installment, was just a load of CG bollocks, basically. Just people sort of fighting in the sky, and it just didn't. It didn't feel like a great finale after what we'd watched. And so I'm interested to see whether this, being possibly the first Marvel series that they have, created after the success of WandaVision, where they've gone, okay, we need a mystery for some episodes, then we need some emotional damage, and then we just have a nice big Marvel finale, and we deliver what everyone is expecting, which is Moon Knight fighting Arthur Harrow and saving the world. Or whether this show is actually going to go in a different direction and give us something special at the end. I'm excited to find out. So, fingers crossed that it does do something different, and we don't just get sort of a retread of where we were at the end of WandaVision, where maybe the finale was a little bit disappointing.
I joked to Kirsty right after this episode, right after I finished watching this episode. I said I just wanted to slap a "The End" title card over that final shot, just how absolutely infuriating to people would that be if it's like Steven's dead and Mark is in the afterlife, and the reason is just like the end, and obviously. Mark's journey is not over, but is Steven's. No, we couldn't be that lucky.
No, you wouldn't be that lucky. Look, I if, as Joe very eloquently put about what the show he says is about, but I say is not and should be. Joe should be writing it. There is no separating Mark and Steven. They have to learn to live with each other. It's kind of a cop-out if Mark's sick, he's dead. I can go on and do my own thing now. I feel like there has to be a big reconciling with the self. That's what, at least if Joe was writing the show, that's what the season finale should be all about. Reconciliation with oneself. I will also say I would not be opposed to CG Bollocks in the last episode.
It's the first time I've heard you say CG Bollocks, and I love it.
Won't be the last.
That sounds like one of your alters, when Alec subsumes a part of his personality and becomes an Englishman. He will appear to the world as CG Bollocks.
In the most bone-chilling chimney sweep accent you've ever heard. Hello, Governor. What the hell was I talking about? But no, obviously there has to be an emotional element, and you're right. There's just so much of this finale has to do, and I do hope that part of it is spectacle. I've just gotten such little spectacle from this series, aside from this episode with the boat in the underworld is pretty cool. But it really cannot be overstated how little actual Moon Knight we've gotten here, to the point where I think my favorite shot in this episode, if not the whole series, is when we get to see the first time that Mark suits up, as it were. That's just visually interesting and cool. Sometimes people say derisively that superhero shows or Marvel movies are built to sell action figures. And what kid is buying a Moon Knight action figure? If you can't, you say that derisively, but at a certain point, it's true. Sometimes action figures are cool. And I just feel like Moon Knight can't even get that part right. Give me a cool ass Moon Knight action figure in episode 6.
Yeah, I think it's just because the CG and the way those fight scenes have been staged in previous episodes that I'm dreading the idea of getting a massive fight sequence at the end of this. As long as it's put together well and it looks good, I'd probably be all for it.
I'm trying to imagine what an Ethan Hawke fight sequence would look like, at least this character. It would be, what is that, episode 2, where Yoda comes out on his cane and then starts jumping around. If Ethan Hawke does that in the last episode, I would be very happy. So maybe it will be that. But if I were writing the last episode, Captain America would show up and give a speech, because I think that's the best way to end Marvel TV shows.
All I want to see now is like a CG brown sandal to the face. I'll take back every negative thing I said about this show if I get that shot.
Lee is absolutely convinced that Harrow is going to turn into a CG crocodile. And, you know, you might have a point. I think he might be onto something. So I could get behind that. You know, I can absolutely.
Maybe the crocodile could be wearing little brown sandals, though. You guys just aren't thinking big enough, is the problem.
Full of broken glass.
Yes.
A Bob Dylan loving crocodile wearing sandals full of broken glass. These sound like Grateful Dead lyrics, actually. I'm liking the show more by the moment. Like you know, it's like I just took a hit of salvia and started, you know, freestyling. Like, this is all right. Like, I'm sorry, am I allowed to say that? I didn't say that.
No one here takes drugs.
Yes.
Yeah.
There you go. I solved it. Everything's better now.
All right. Well, look, last week I got in trouble for asking everybody for finale predictions, so I'm not going to do that. But what do you want to see? Like, what do you absolutely like? Kirsty wants to see a CG brown sandal to Oscar Isaac's face. Joe, what do you absolutely need to see in that final episode next week?
Oh gosh, I don't know that I have a need to see. I too fear the end of WandaVision. I thought that was a real bummer, except for the whole Ship of Theseus talk. So if they are gonna do, you know, CG Bollocks, then they need to also give some sort of conversation so we can have a heart-to-heart between Stephen and Mark. That's great. But I was only half joking when I said that I want Captain America to show up and give a speech, because I do really think that was the only ending to that particular show, was him becoming Captain America, giving a speech. And I'm okay with the finale for these shows to be just conversations. I mean, Alec's point is well taken, that, you know, fundamentally the thing that draws us to superheroes is the spectacle. You know, if we really want deep psychological dives of characters, there are other genres that do that much better, as opposed to just kind of table setting on the way to the big fight. So I hear that, but like Kirsty said, the CG has not been great, nor have even many of the physical fight scenes. So the thing that has been most interesting to me is Zaster Isaac's performance, is the Layla stuff. The acting has been my favorite part of the show so far. So I'm hoping that the climax involves that, some sort of showpiece for the actors, more than it turns into CG nonsense. And if by chance it does turn to CG nonsense, maybe that's what they've been saving all their money for, and it's going to look amazing, and then I'll be happy with that too. But
Alec's going to be like the closing credits. Like, that's going to be his answer.
No, I'll be even snottier than that. In the season finale of the television program Moon Knight, I would like to see Moon Knight.
You know what? So would I. Like, I would, you know, I don't want to be a basic bro here, but I would like to see Moon Knight kicking some ass. Like, I think I would really like to see that.
You know what? And like, I've talked about, you know, I've begged for spectacle, but like, to get Moon Knight, like, we don't even necessarily have to be a spectacle. Like, let's have like just Moon Knight walking around, or like Moon Knight, like. And like Joe, I agree. Like, sometimes, you know, spectacle is not warranted. My favorite finale of any of these shows thus far is Loki, which is just a conversation between three people, because we got plenty of spectacle beforehand. They built up a believable world. It was, you know, more crucially than anything, entertaining up to that point. And they kept the entertainment going with like that really compelling conversation just with a handful of people talking about larger than life topics. But yeah, for the Moon Knight finale, I need Moon Knight. He's been like, the guy in the costume has been in the series for like all of 6 minutes. And I would like to see more of him. And then the credits.
In the finale, I'd like to find out what Jake's purpose is, like Joe was talking about earlier, like what he represents to their identity as a whole. But I'd also like to see if Jake has his own Moon Knight suit. I talked about this earlier on in the day, is that I thought, if this could be a brand new creation for the MCU, and if Jake appears and has his own suit, then I think I would just be quite happy to see that transpire and to find out what that looks like. And if that's all I get, then maybe I can live with it, because even though this show's been a hot mess, I would rather watch a hot mess than something that was just kind of by the numbers and didn't try anything or wasn't afraid to mess up. So yeah, let's see what happens next week, but maybe we'll look back on Moon Knight a bit more favourably in the rearview mirror than we have as we're going along.
I hope you're right. I really do. I hope I've been wrong this entire time. But I think that is it for this week's Marvel Standom, folks. Thank you so much. We will be back again next Wednesday, where we'll break down Moon Knight Episode 6 and unpack all the other happenings in the Marvel Universe. Make sure you're subscribing to us wherever you're listening right now. Don't forget to check out our web home of denofgeek.com, where you can find all our Marvel and Moon Knight coverage. Drop us a line. Let us know your burning questions and what you want us to cover in upcoming episodes, because we're gonna have a little time between Moon Knight and Doctor Strange and then Ms. Marvel. So let us know what you want to see. We are at Marvel Standom on Twitter and Instagram. Give them a follow. You can shout at us there too. Don't forget, we also have a DC show, so check out DC Standom where you can on all major podcast platforms. Now, if you came in late, you'll be able to watch this entire episode on denofgeek.com or at our YouTube home, Den of Geek US. Don't forget, you can check out past episodes of Marvel Standom there as well, and also wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you once again to our special guest and future regular, Joe George. We hope to see you again soon. And we see your byline on Den of Geek every single day, so make sure you read them, folks. Thanks to our brilliant and patient producer, Andrew Halley, for making us look good and not roasting me this week. Thank goodness, my God. Thanks to Den of Geek social media coordinator, Lee Parham, for making sure you all behave yourselves and for helping me out with info when I need it. Special shout out to our podcast producer, Michael R., for making the show sound great. And most of all, thanks to all of you for watching. We love having you. This has been Marvel Standom on the Den of Geek Network. And until next time, remember, folks, we stand together.